What's good, people? And welcome into the Week 8 NFL Fantasy Football Game Recap. I'm Jesse Moore. As you can tell, I'm doing it solo today. We have some things come up. Usually it's myself and Aaron or SC or one of the other members of the Rat Pack Fantasy Group. And today, just doing it solo. So just got back from dinner, so I figure I might as well jump into this. It's about 8:30 Pacific time, so 11:30 for you East Coast heads. And we just had the Sunday Night Football game come down, so we're all set, ready to roll through towards Monday. But we're gonna recap all of these games and kind of hit the keynotes and go from there. So I wanted to bring up Sleeper, and we'll just go from there. So thank you for joining me today, and let's get into this. What do you think? So the first game, we're gonna go back to Thursday, talk about Buffalo and Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay lost 18-24. Really, Buffalo more controlled this game. It's only a 6-point game, but they let Tampa Bay hang around. And if you look at the fantasy points perspective, it's pretty good on both ends. Josh Allen, 31 fantasy points, doing his thing, just, 324 yards, passing 2 touchdowns, 41 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown. On the flip side, Baker Mayfield, respectable 23 points. And there was concern with him this week. We weren't sure how good he was going to be going up against the Bills defense because he's been up or down, but 49 pass attempts, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, a 2-point conversion, which is always nice. And he had 19 yards on the ground, so it just raised his foot a little bit. There was a lot of more garbage time with this because it took Tampa Bay every effort. It seemed like they struggled a lot with the drives early on. So they kind of got it going more towards the end of the game. And that's why it's a close score, but it didn't really feel like it. And then we get down to the running backs. Rashad White really got his bread and butter done through the receiving. He had 7 receptions for 7 yards. On the ground, he did next to nothing. He had 9 attempts, 39 yards. Chase Edmonds, he only had 6 total opportunities, 21 total yards, nothing to take away. Keyshawn Vaughn had a carry, so, it's good for that. You'll notice Sean Tucker's name is nowhere to be found, so this sucks for Sean Tucker. I had a post talking about this during the game where I was like, this tells us all we need to know about Sean Tucker in Dynasty, where he just can't get snaps over Edmonds and Vaughn. Like, sorry, man, like, it's more than likely not going to happen for you. Flip side for Buffalo, James Cook, solid game. Nothing really, to write home about. He wasn't as involved as we hoped, but he did get the majority of the work compared to Latavius Murray. He had 14 carries for 67 yards. Latavius Murray had 5 carries for 7 yards. Cook had a reception. Murray had a reception, but neither one hit 10 points. So it was a little disappointing on both ends. They had opportunities. Cook has a share on the goal line. He missed. Latavius Murray tried to bounce it outside on the goal line. He didn't score, so that's why their scores are pretty low in this game. We get down to the wide receivers. Chris Godwin was really nice. He had 17 fantasy points, 5 receptions on 7 targets, 54 yards, and a touchdown. Mike Evans saved his day with the late touchdown. It was a pretty rough day for Evans. He had one catch where he got open and had about a 40-yard catch on one of the last drives, but he's called back for holding. So at that point, you're kind of thinking this day's cooked for Mike Evans, but he managed to save his bacon. You got the touchdown. Sometimes that's all it takes to carry you for fantasy. So that's always the thing about Mike Evans is no matter what happens, he's a 6'5" wide receiver who's an end zone target. And it was pretty lucky to catch a touchdown, but he got it. And for Buffalo, it took Diggs everything to get him to where he got. It was very much Gabe Davis day, as you can see by the points here. But Gabe Davis had 23 points, 12 targets, 9 receptions, 87 yards, a touchdown. Just a really good day for Gabe Davis. We were talking about this. Could be one of those days for Gabe Davis. It's kind of the roller coaster day is him. He's playing against a suspect pass defense, and he showed out. They had about 3 receptions on the first drive, so you knew from that point moving forward, it was more likely going to be a Gabe Davis day. Stephon Diggs got 70 yards total, 9 receptions, 16 points. If that's like a low floor day for Diggs, he doesn't kill you. Obviously, it's not a boom performance, but you live with it. And then Khalil Shakir. Interestingly enough, this is something to keep an eye on. Is Shakir had 6 receptions for 92 yards and 15 points. Keep an eye on him moving forward. We'll see how this role works out. But with now, they're just going ahead and having Dalton Kincaid on the field like the entire time. Quentin Morris didn't really do anything as the other tight end. Like he didn't play any snaps. Khalil Shakir's playing that slot role, and the offense just looked better with Shakir than it did with Dawson Knox on the field. So, I think this fits them better, and you can see, Shakir had a far better day than anything Knox has done this week. As we get to the tight ends, Kate Otten basically ran every snap and did nothing with it. He had 6 targets, so that's not bad. But Baker threw it 42 times, right? So it's kind of just it is what it is. 8.7 fantasy points because he had a 2-point conversion. That saved his day. On the flip side, Dalton Kincaid. Woo, baby, Dalton Kincaid looked really nice. 5 receptions, 7 targets. He was very much a focal point of this game throughout. 65 yards and a touchdown. This is why he was the number 1 waiver wire tight end to pick up for me. It's He's stepping into an enhanced role, and he's a really good wide receiver. He's like one of the better receiving prospect tight ends we've seen in a while. You connect him to Josh Allen, and magical things can happen. So yeah, like we'll expect more of this moving forward from Dalton Kincaid. It was just really nice. Nobody else did anything for the Bills side ends. He basically ran all the snaps. We get to the kickers. We had Tyler Bass kind of just did 6 points. McLaughlin didn't really do anything, as you see here, just 5 points. It was just kind of just a ho-hum day for both the guys. And the defenses, they didn't really do anything either. The Buccaneers defense had 4 points. The Bills defense had 6 points. The Bills defense had just a few more sacks, and the Buccaneers had 1 turnover. But not really much to write home about for these defenses. So, Bills moved to 5-3. Tampa Bay moves to 3-4. So let's go to the next game. We had Houston playing Carolina, and everyone's probably thinking, like, hey, this is the number 1, number 2 overall picks, right? Yes, it is. And interestingly enough is the first overall pick, who has struggled up until this point, looked actually not bad throughout the game. He obviously didn't put up a lot of stats, but they got it done in the clutch when it counts. So for Bryce Young, 22 for 31, 235 yards. He had a passing touchdown and 15 total points. Just solid. I was actually pretty impressed watching him play. Like their offense is leaps and bounds better than what it was earlier in the year with Bryce Young. He fits the role of like a number 1 overall prospect. Like he looks like an NFL capable quarterback. On the flip side, CJ Stroud only had 12 fantasy points, 24 attempts, only 140 yards, didn't really do much of anything. And as you see here, his numbers have come down a little bit. I think they need to like adjust to like how NFL defenses are treating them now. It was a really good matchup, and he kind of disappointed. So it sucks. I mean, Stroud's obviously a stud prospect. He looks great. Just his numbers have come down. So they're not throwing it 40 times a game anymore because they have the defense is playing well. So it's kind of hurting him on the flip side. Interestingly enough, you'll see Pierce is well down the list for running backs, but Devin Singletary was just better. And this is what I've been talking about for a while now. Devin Singletary just looks like the better back in that offense. And as you can see, Pierce did really nothing. He had 12 carries, 46 yards, only 4.6 fantasy points. Singletary had 6 fantasy points. He had 10 carries for 30 yards, but only 2 receptions. And just give me 1 second here. I got someone letting me know something. So, yeah, I'm not excited about either one of these assets in this backfield. But, I mean, Singletary was a free pickup for majority of the year. So if he's still available, grab Singletary and see how this shakes out. He just seems like a better fit in that offense. So, I'm definitely thinking Pierce is one of the bigger busts that he was drafted at. It's just I don't see him fitting there. And if you look at his points, like he really hasn't done much of anything. He has yet to average over 4 yards per carry any game this season. And this is 3 games in a row where he hasn't did double-digit fantasy points, and it's just not looking good, man. He's no receiving volume. So you see the last 4 weeks, he's only got 3 combined targets. That's trouble. There's no receiving volume, which means he needs to hit at home on the ground, and he's not doing that. He's been one of the least efficient running backs in the NFL. So, yeah, it sucks for Pierce. I still think he's a good running back, but, man, it's rough. On Carolina, you'll notice Miles Sanders is nowhere to be found. Chuba Hubbard took over the backfield, and this is why we were talking about stashing Chuba Hubbard, because he's also looked like the better running back in this offense. So both of these, the Carolina and Houston offenses, both the starting running backs have not looked good all year. Sanders has dealt with injury, but man, he got out targeted and out carried like by Raheem Blackshear. Like this is not good for Miles Sanders. I think he did get paid, and this is what they always say: don't follow the money with running backs, because if they're not talented, this is the issue with Sanders. He just doesn't look as good that he did in Philadelphia. And no surprise, like the Panthers O-line is not as good. So like they're more counting on him and his skill set. And it's looking rough. Him and Pierce are one of the two just seem like bigger trap running backs all season. And that's how it's shaking out. Hubbard was pretty solid. I mean, not on the ground, but he did some work on the ground, gave you 7 fantasy points. He was also inefficient, but it seems clearly that coaching staff trusts him. So moving forward, I was talking about this morning with Aaron, where I said I'm probably going to have Hubbard ranked above Sanders this week, and it did, and it worked out. So if you played Hubbard, you're happy about it. If you have Sanders or Pierce, you need to do something. Like you need to figure out a way to improve that position or just go a different route, because it's going to be rough for them moving forward. We get to the wide receivers. Thielen, once again, I know Thomas Brown took over as offensive coordinator. It didn't matter. Adam Thielen, 8 receptions, 11 targets, 72 yards, 15 fantasy points. That's well done. And Mingo got involved. So we see Jonathan Mingo kind of coming on, 10 fantasy points, 4 receptions, 5 targets, 62 yards. That's a solid day for Mingo. That might be his best of the season. Let me check. It is his best fantasy points performance, and he's finally hit double digits. So you think that moving forward. DJ Chark didn't really do much. Terrace Marshall didn't really do much. So DJ Chark, 2 receptions, 23 yards, nothing really that he did there. Terrace Marshall, 1 reception, 9 yards. That is what it is. When we get to the Houston side, this is the more disappointing because Houston had dominated against 2 high coverages, which Carolina was running a lot of. And Nico and Tank Dell were 2 of the more efficient yards per run receivers in the NFL going up against that. And what they do, they both kind of shit the bed this week, right? We have Brown above. So Noah Brown was the best fantasy wide receiver for the Texans. I don't think anybody saw that coming, right? 3 receptions, 5 targets, 57 yards. Nico Collins had 4 receptions, 6 targets, just 30 yards. Tank Dell had 3 carries for 15 yards, so that kind of helped him out a little bit there, that they're involving him on the ground. So take that note, take that home, right? Because we want our wide receivers, if they're getting carries, that's something we like. He had 3 receptions, 4 targets, 16 yards, didn't do much of anything, but this was his first game off with the concussion. He did seem a little risky. I almost started him in the league, went against it, went with Deontay. Thankfully, that worked out, but yeah. And as you can tell, the quarterbacks didn't really pass for much in this game. So Tommy Tremble, he had 2 receptions, 3 targets, and he had a touchdown to save his day. Dalton Schultz, 2 receptions. He had 5 targets. That's not bad, but only 5 yards. That's just atrocious. Doesn't do anything. The kickers, Kai Fairbairn, not usable at all. He had 1 extra point. It's weird because he missed an extra point because that's how they had 13. You were probably wondering, like, that looks like he hit 2 field goals. No, I just missed. So it's a weird score. I'm not sure how that worked out, how else Sleeper scoring that. But Eddie Pinheiro, 3 field goals for you. Not bad. 9 points. You're happy with that. He did miss an extra point. So overall, not a bad day for him. On the other side, the defense for the Texans really showed out. 6 sacks against Bryce Young. Only 15 points, but only 7 points. Where Carolina, they had 2 sacks, but they got the fumble. They forced it, and they caused it. That's how they got 9 points. Ahead for them. Now, we're going to move on to our next game. We have the Rams at Dallas, and boy, did Dallas boat race L.A. Interestingly enough, LA's offense had looked really good up until this point. They ran up into one of the best defenses in the league, and Dallas really just disrupted everything they did on offense. Dallas got ahead early, and it was a blowout throughout the game. Dak Prescott had by far his best game of the year. 32 fantasy points, 25 completions of 31 attempts, 304 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. That's just a heck of a day. As you can see, it was a blowout. That's why we had both backups get into the game. For Stafford, not a good day for Stafford. 13 completions for 22 attempts, 162 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Just was under pressure, and he just did not look good throughout this game. As the score points out, they lost by 3 scores. This makes sense, actually. Like, this is not a good day. For the Rams, Darrell Henderson was the better running back. We were talking about the situation and how much they wanted to involve Gaskin. Gaskin was not involved. It was once again the Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman show. So Henderson, he had more total opportunities. That's what we're looking for. He had 15 opportunities, put together 85 yards, and 11 fantasy points. It's not great, but it doesn't kill you. On the flip side, Royce Freeman had 9 carries, so good for him. And he's the one that got the touchdown. So that's how he got to double digits, 44 yards. You would think Tony Pollard would ball out, right, with 43 total points, but only 12 carries, 50 yards, didn't really do much, and just 1 reception for 2 yards. So Pollard has not lived up to his draft capital. I know he's pushing into round 1 early this season, but it's just not coming together for Pollard. So at this point, you kind of have to write him out because I don't think you're going to get much of a return for him, but they need to figure out a better way to get involved in the offense. And then you had Rico Dwaddle cutting into his work a little bit. He had 5 carries, 18 yards, didn't do much of anything, and he had 2 receptions. The fact that Dwaddle is out targeting Pollard, yeah, that's not what we want to see. That's not what we're looking forward to. But no running back really did anything at all for Dallas, which is unfortunate. With 43 points, you expect that. So we get to the receivers. Oh, baby. CeeDee Lamb just had one of his best games. I think this might have been his best fantasy game of his career. 12 receptions, 14 targets, 158 yards, 2 touchdowns. Lamb was nonstop in this game. It's basically what you could take away is if Dallas features Lamb in this offense, it looks so much better going through Lamb than anyone else does. Brandon Cooks, he was also, put up a touchdown. Another 14 points for Brandon Cooks. So he's not dead, folks. He's had some decent performances back-to-back weeks. 2 touchdowns are boosting him up, but he's getting 4 targets each game. So it's a little, touchdown dependent, but it gets you by. So if you have him on the bench and you need to start him in the matchup, you could probably get by with that. Gallup's just droppable. Like he's not doing anything offensively. As you can see here, he has a couple decent performances, but man, it's just he's not doing much of anything. So he had 10 targets last game. This game he sells 3 targets. Part of that is because they got such a big lead, but it's like you're just going to feature CeeDee Lamb. So I get it. People still have a thing for Gallup, but I'm just not interested. So two receptions, 20 yards, not much of anything. No other wide receiver did anything for them. We had Kevontre Turpin had 1 reception for, 13 yards. So there's that. We get to the Rams. You'll notice Puka and Kupp are well down the list, and that's not what you want to see, right? So Ben Skowronek caught the touchdown. That's how he gets the 9 fantasy points. He had 1 reception, 20 yards, touchdown. Puka Nacua, 3 receptions, 7 targets, 43 yards, just 7 fantasy points. Disappointing day for Puka. We get to Tutu. He had the 2-point conversion. That boosts him up a little bit. But, 2 carries for 8 yards, 2 receptions, 21 yards. Not much of anything for Puka. Cooper Kupp had 10 targets and only got you 6 fantasy points. That's brutal. He only had 21 yards on the 4 receptions. Just that's not what you want to see from Cooper Kupp. Now, I know people are probably frustrated because I am frustrated with Cooper Kupp, but he's seen the targets, man. Like, look at these targets. 12, 9, 7, and 10. The volume is there. He's just having struggles. He started out high as like a fish frying in a grease pan, as they say, but man, it's been a couple of weeks. So this is bound to happen with receivers. They fluctuate a lot, but you got to just trust in the targets with Cooper and Puka. Do not overthink it. Don't worry about it. They're studs. Like, you'll be fine with them. The tight ends, Jake Ferguson, solid day. 14 fantasy points, 4 receptions, 47 yards, and a touchdown. And that's what it is with a lot of these outside the top 12 tight ends, right? Like, once you get there, they're touchdown dependent. We get to Tyler Higbee. He was solid. 5 receptions, 45 yards, 9 fantasy points. That does not kill you at all. Like, you can live with that from Tyler Higbee. Luke Schoonmaker, their 2nd-round pick, he got a reception for 13 yards. So, he finally, I think that's what his second reception of the year. Yeah, it's not been great for him. Seems like they wasted a 2nd-round pick on him, but who knows? Maybe it'll work out in the long term, but it seemed like a reach at the time. Playing out that way. Now, interestingly, Brandon Aubrey, really good day. He had 2 field goals for, 13 points, 5 extra points. That's how you do it. We get to Luke Havershek. This guy came in basically off the scrap heap. Did some things for them. 2 field goals and 7 fantasy points. It's not bad. The Rams defense was atrocious in this game. They only gave 1 fantasy point. Cowboys defense did it again. Cowboys defense has been really good. They are the number 1 defensive fantasy. Put up 15 fantasy points for you, right? They took a couple sacks, defensive touchdown, a safety, a block. They did everything. Now we get to another game, and this game has some serious injury implications. So Minnesota wins 24-10 over the Green Bay Packers. They're now 4-4. Packers are 2-5. The thing is, Kirk Cousins, we're basically just under the assumption he tore his Achilles. So this is going to nuke this offense for the parts moving forward. That's why Jaron Hall got onto the field, is because they were winning late in the game, and Cousins, you saw the replay, just looked like he ruptured his Achilles. So he's done for the year, and this offense takes a significant downgrade. As fun as it was with Hawkinson, Addison, when Jefferson, whenever he was going to come back, this all gets thrown into flux, and it's really just going to knock all these guys down moving forward, and it sucks. So we'll talk about that as we get down to each position. The flip side, Jordan Love, 15 fantasy points, and as bad as his offense looked, like, if you told me he got 15 fantasy points, I would be shocked. Like, he did not look good at all, right? 41 attempts, 229 yards, a touchdown, pick. He has a couple carries, kind of saved his bacon. And yeah, Jaron Hall, that's why he was in. But you see, like, he couldn't do much of anything. We get to sorry about that. We'll get to the running backs here. We have Cam Akers, 9 fantasy points. He had 9 carries. Really didn't do much of anything. He had a touchdown saved his day because he was not efficient at all. That's 25 total yards on 10 touches. That's really gross. For Alexander Madison, even more inefficient. 16 carries, 31 yards, 1 reception, 4 fantasy points. And the fullback, CJ Ham, got involved. It's just, man. If you thought it was bad before for these running backs, now that Kirk Cousins is not in, I don't even want to roster these guys. Like, they're just going to burn holes on your bench. You're not really going to be able to trust them. Neither guy's been efficient. They're just behind a bad offensive line that doesn't really generate openings for them. So, like, these are not the type of backs that are capable of carrying an offensive line. They need offensive line. They don't have it. On the flip side for the Packers, A.J. Dillon, once again, got basically the majority of the work. 6 carries, 11 yards, another inefficient back. Way to go, A.J. Dillon. He did have 5 receptions, so that's nice to see for A.J. Dillon. That's how he saved his day with 10 fantasy points, because this was a gross day for Dillon. Jones still is not 100%, so this was kind of our situation we were talking about going into the game with Aaron Jones. If he's not healthy, which he clearly is not, we don't know when he's going to be back to himself. So you kind of have to ride this out in the short term with Jones before he comes back to who he was. Because we saw week 1, he was a freaking stud before he was injured. Like, he did everything you wanted, right? The 86 yards touchdown was just efficient. Looked great. The efficiency there, like, the numbers aren't bad. It's just he's just not getting enough work right now. So that's kind of the problem with Jones. So we get to the wide receivers. Jordan Addison did his thing. It was funny. They were interviewing Jair Alexander, and he said Jordan Addison got lucky and caught the touchdown over him. They lined Addison up in the backfield, and he just ran right past him. So I don't know what the hell Jair Alexander's talking about. He's really just – I just found it entertaining. I was like, really? You're the one that gave up the touchdown. What are you talking about? Addison, 7 receptions, 82 yards and a touchdown. That's just what you love to see. KJ Osborne, 17 fantasy points, 8 receptions, 99 yards. Like, that's just a heck of a good day for anybody, let alone KJ Osborne. So it's a nice day. So now remember, it's going to be a struggle moving forward with these guys. I would not expect anything close to these numbers for them, which sucks because Addison looked awesome. Osborne was somebody you could play as a flex, right? As we go to the Green Bay Packers, Jordan Reed had 4 receptions, 83 yards, 12 fantasy points. Romeo Doubs, 4 receptions on 9 targets. Really inefficient. 18 yards. I don't know how you get 4 receptions for 18 yards. That really blows my mind. He's lived well in the day with a touchdown. Christian Watson had 3 receptions on 8 targets, 33 yards. As you can see, like, this is a Jordan Love problem. He's just not very good. He's bringing down these offensive skill players. They have the talent. Like, they should be a lot better. It's just not clicking. So they need to figure out how to generate better looks for Jordan Love, like scheme up some more touches for Watson, like in shortened space, let them work. They got to do something because Green Bay looks really bad right now. Like, they look like one of the worst teams in the NFL. As we get to the tight ends, Luke Musgrave played. We weren't sure if he was going to play. He was hampered. 2 targets, 9 yards, just nothing. Killed you. TJ Hawkinson did the thing once again. Without freaking Justin Jefferson, Hawkinson has been a stud, man. Like, look at these fantasy points. Like, he's 20, 19, 11, 10. Like, the guy's he's balling out. He's been really good. I know people like, I think he's overrated myself, but like, it's hard to argue the fantasy points. 6 receptions, 88 yards, a touchdown. You get that from any tight end, you're happy. So, like I said, the problem is moving forward without Kirk Cousins, how this offense is going to look with Jaren Hall. Ideally, they move off of Hall and they get, Jacoby Brissett. They go after some guy like that. Maybe Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee, since Will Levis had the ridiculous game of all games, first game ever. So, you go find someone to at least support this offense because otherwise you're not going to be able to watch this offense. As we get down to the kickers, Greg Joseph, 1 field goal, 4 fantasy points. Andrews Carlson, 1 field goal, 1 extra point, 4 fantasy points. So they didn't really do much of anything. Kind of a disappointing game for them. We get to the defense. The Vikings defense had just a much better day. 4 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 10 points allowed, and a pick. Packers, they did some things, but they just gave up more points. They had 3 sacks, forced fumble. They even recovered 1, and they had 1 block, but it wasn't enough for the Packers. So 8-12, that's solid from these defenses. Like, you're happy with that performance. Now, we're going to move on to New Orleans and Indianapolis. New Orleans beats Indianapolis in one of the more entertaining games of the game, 38-27. We look here, Derek Carr. Look at the pass attempts, 27 attempts, 310 yards, 2 touchdowns. This is the best Derek Carr's looked in a while, and it's because he hit Rashid Shaheed for a deep bomb, and so that's why his numbers look so good in this game. That had a lot to do with it. But hey, props to Carr. I think this might be the first time he's hit over 20 points all year. Yeah, it is the first time he hit over 20 points all year. So he broke that barrier and got through. Ideally, and we go past that a little bit. They get Chicago next week, Minnesota the week after that. It should be 2 good weeks for Derek Carr, but this is Derek Carr, folks. He's not the best quarterback in the world for fantasy, so you have to temper expectations a little bit. Gardner Minshew, he is a super erratic fantasy quarterback. You don't know which performance you're going to get until you get to the day of it. We've seen Minshew ball out. We've seen him have terrible performances. You can see he's put up 6 points. He's put up 10 points. He's put up 29 points. And he put 16. So he gives you more middle-of-the-road performance here. 41 attempts, 213 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a pick, but 16 fantasy points is solid. Like, that gets you, if you're streaming a quarterback, you're okay with that. You can live with that. It's not the boom performance, but it gets you through. Now, the running backs, you'll know, we'll cover Indy first because I think it's more interesting than the Kamara side. Kamara's a super fancy set. Zach Moss, just a better day than Jonathan Taylor. So 11 carries, 66 yards, touchdown. If you look at Jonathan Taylor's stat, he had 12 carries, 95 yards, no touchdown. So that's basically the point differential. Taylor was super efficient, 12 carries for 95 yards, got him 10 points. But Zach Moss got the touchdown. That's how he got to 14 fantasy points. And a lot of times, that's the difference with these guys sometimes. But as you can see, they're clearly splitting work between these 2 guys, right? So I mentioned this today on Twitter. That is going to be a thing that hampers Taylor for as long as they allow it. I know some people thought maybe they're showcasing Zach Moss to trade him. I don't know why they would do that. They clearly brought in Zach Moss because they liked him. He fits a role in this offense, so he's likely just going to keep playing a role. On the flip side, Alvin Kamara is just a fantasy god. 27 fantasy points, 17 carries, 59 yards, 4 receptions, 51 yards, and another touchdown. Kamara is doing his best CMC, and I know there was a post where basically they had the same exact stats, even though Kamara's played 10 more games over their careers, but it's really hard to dispute. Kamara's just a fancy gold mine. Like, that's just what he does. Now, he's been inefficient, and particularly through the air, but like 4 receptions, 51 yards, that's definitely a lot more efficient than we're used to. So I'm curious how his role survives in this offense, but like Derek Carr just loves checking it down to Alvin Kamara. I'm curious, what are the lowest receptions Kamara has? Like his lowest is 3 and 4, so like he's going to be involved, and the targets are just like he's getting hyper targeted. So yeah, you're feel safe with him. Jamal Williams. So this is a problem with him and Kendre. Like you just don't know how it's going to go for these two. There's just not a lot of work there available. Jamal Williams, 5 carries, 30 yards, 4 fantasy points. Kendre Miller, 3 carries for 10 yards, 1 reception. Gave you 2.9 fantasy points. It just is what it is. Like it's the Alvin Kamara backfield, man. Until he moves on or whatever it is. Like I don't really like it for Kendre, and Jamal Williams just kind of just stuck just playing an ancillary role in that offense. Now you see why there were some decent wide receiver scores. Raheed Shaheed, 153 yards on 3 receptions and a touchdown. Yeah, he had a bomb of a touchdown in this game. So that's why it is like something like 80 yards or whatever it was. He just caught one deep and just housed it. So congrats to Shaheed on a big day. We were talking about him as maybe being a flex play if you wanted to. If you flexed him, you're loving life right now. Michael Thomas gave you 10 fantasy points, had 4 receptions, 68 yards. Not the best day, not the worst day, but this is Michael Thomas. He is what he is now. He's going to give you 10 fantasy points no matter what. The only way you get over the 10 fantasy points is if he gets the touchdown. He's that type of floor play guy. He's solid. He's not going to kill you, but there's just really no ceiling, right? So it is what it is. Chris Olave, another disappointing day. Saw 9 targets, only 4 to 6 yards, 9.6 fantasy points. It's just not coming together for Olave, and I know we were excited for Derek Carr and him, but this is just, it's not working out. So they need to work on something together, get that chemistry growing because, a lot of it was like a 2nd, 3rd round pick, and he is not living up to it. He's the freaking, what is he? He was the wide receiver 22 before this game. He's going to drop even further. It's just kind of just, it's just disappointing with where you drafted him. Because I think you drafted him as a top 12 wide receiver for no one. On the flip side, Michael Pittman, 13 more targets, man, 40 yards touchdown. Like, congrats to Pittman. Like, he's looked awesome. He just keeps doing it week in and week out. Going into the game, he's wide receiver 15. Just, the guy just keeps producing. Look at this. 18, 16, 19, 10 fantasy points from weeks 5 through 8. So, like, that's well done by him. We go to Josh Downs. He had 7 receptions for 72 yards. Another great day for Josh Downs. I know we were worried about him going into the year, but the talent's shining through. So this is the ultimate bet on talent situation, and the situation will work out itself. Josh Downs just been really, really good. If you have him on your team, you're loving life. Alec Pierce, 3 receptions, 41 yards, gave you 7 points. He's really not on many rosters. He's on 8% of rosters right now. People are pretty much done with him. I don't blame them. There's really not much you can do for you. Now we get to the tight ends, and you'll see Taysom Hill played a significant role in this offense. We talked about it this morning with Taysom Hill. Said, ride the hot hand Taysom Hill until it kills you because he's tight end 4 on the week, I think. Just balled out with 22 fantasy points. He had 2 attempts, 1 completion, 44 yards, 9 carries, 2 touchdowns, and he even had a reception. He's Mr. Do-It-All, Mr. Handyman, Mr. Fix-It. He could just do a little bit of everything for you. 22 fantasy points. That's so nice. Juwan Johnson, not great, my friend. People had him as a little late round dart throw. It's just not working out for him. And people have pretty much given up on him this year, which, I don't blame him. He's done nothing. So he gave you 1 reception for 5 yards. On the flip side, it was a different Colts tight end this time. So Andrew Ogletree, step forward. Like, they've been playing merry-go-round with those Colts tight ends. We did like Granson for a while, but he's out with an injury. Then there's Mo Alley Cox, Will Mallory. These all guys are just playing a role. But the difference is Ogletree had 1 reception for 33 yards, a touchdown. Mo Alley Cox, Will Mallory both had a reception. Didn't do much of anything with those, so that's why they have 2, 1 fantasy points. We get to the kickers. Matt Gay, he's been a solid kicker this year, and he gave you another 10 points. Just nothing to write home about, but you know what? You're not too mad about it. He kicked 2 field goals, and that was that. We get to Blake Grupe, who is a rookie. He had 8 points. Just a solid performance for him. 5 extra points for him. Got it done through that way. We get to the Saints. They gave you 4 fantasy points. Didn't really do much of anything. They had a couple sacks. The Colts defense got shredded for 38 points, so no surprise they gave you nothing, right? They had a forced fumble, a sack, fumble recovery. Does not matter. Now, we're going to move on to our next game. We're at a half hour here, so I'm going to pick it up a little bit. we are going to talk about the New England Patriots and Miami Dolphins. Miami hosts the Patriots, won 31-17. And this is kind of what you would expect with this game. Mac Jones, I mentioned him as like a late dart throw, streamer. Gave you 14 fantasy points. That's better than some of the other quarterbacks that was with this week. So if you streamed him, I wouldn't necessarily call it a hit, but it's not a miss. It's okay, right? Obviously, if you're going up against a top guy like Tua, that's over 10-point difference between the two of them. But, he had 161 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 29 attempts. It's just, that's kind of Mac Jones in a nutshell. Not great for fantasy. If you're desperate and you need him, the offense looks a lot better now. You could probably stream him in decent matchups like against the one in Miami. On the flip side, Tua doing it big, 30 completions, 45 attempts, 324 yards, 3 touchdowns, just 24 fantasy points, just another fantastic day for Tua. As you look at Tua throughout the weeks, he's been really, really good. He's a top 5 quarterback, 24 fantasy points this week. Last week he had 11, 25 the week before, 18 the week before that. And you go on, it's just a lot of just ceiling games and a pretty high floor for Tua. So moving forward, Tua is he's a locked in stud. That's what it is. Raheem Mostert, he got a touchdown in this game and worked out well for him. So he had 13 carries, 46 yards, touchdown. Touchdown saved his day. He wasn't super efficient, but, Patriots defense kind of found himself a little bit there on the ground. So what's interesting is Jeff Wilson saw 5 carries and 2 receptions where he gave you 5.7 fantasy points. Salvon Ahmed even was involved where he had 2 carries, 4 receptions, but only gave you 5 fantasy points. It's no surprise. They just kind of cutting into the role Mostert has. So Mostert's going to be the 1A moving forward in this offense until the chain comes back. And when he comes back, then Mostert's going to be the 1B. In good matchup, both guys will be able to beat. On the flip side for the New England Patriots, Ramondre Stevenson, 10 carries, 39 yards, 2 receptions, 11 yards on the ground, 7 fantasy points. He's on the struggle bus. He had 2 good weeks back-to-back in weeks 6 and 7. Week 8, more what we're used to with Ramondre. It just hasn't been good. He's not lived up to the cost either. And once again, Zeke Elliott just really cutting into that workload, right? 7 carries, 36 yards, 3.6 fantasy points. Just didn't really do much, but, he just limited Ramondre, which sucks for Ramondre because we liked him last year. But at this point, you kind of know what Ramondre is, right? He's sharing work. He's not super efficient. It's just not working out in a good offense. So that's kind of the problem. He was being hyper-targeted last year. That's not happening this year. So that's why he's seeing such a knockoff in his production, right? For the wide receivers, Kendrick Bourne was the best wide receiver on the day because he got a touchdown. 3 receptions, 36 yards touchdown. Interestingly enough, we've talked on the Dynasty chats and some of our streams we've done. Demario Pop Douglas has been a guy where we've talked about a lot because he looks good and Juju was active, but Douglas led the team in reception, led the team in targets. I mean, it didn't really do much, but he gave you 7 fantasy points. It's just something to take home for him moving forward. He's not really, unless you're in deeper leagues, he's not really worth rostering and redraft. But Dynasty, you need to keep an eye out for this guy. He's rostered in all my leagues, but if he's not rostered, go pick him up. He's well worth the Dynasty roster spot. I think he has long-term potential in this offense to be, kind of like how Brady had Edelman, similar to that in this offense with Mac Jones. So we'll see. His role is going to keep growing in this offense, and Juju, there's nothing here for Juju. He got a touchdown, but it was 1 reception. That's it. For 3 yards, 7.3 fantasy points. Really, it's just it's been atrocious. He was the wide receiver 103 this year. Obviously, has not been a good year for Juju, by far. But it kind of just is what it is, unfortunately. You just can't count on him. So, we're going to move on to the other ones, and we go back. The last guy on the list for the Patriots, Devontae Parker, 1 reception, 1.4. Just 2 fancy points. I really just don't care about Devontae Parker. He just doesn't serve no purpose. On the flip side, the 2 stud Miami wide receivers balled out. Both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle had 25 fantasy points. Tyreek Hill, 13 targets, 112 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle, 12 targets, 121 yards, and a touchdown. Eerily similar. This is just what you love to see. Waddle finally had his boom game. We've been talking about it for a while. He's due. He's due for some regression. It hit this game. So hopefully started Jalen Waddle under the fantasy points. Even Cedric Wilson got a touchdown. He had 7 fantasy points. Braxton Berrios, he had 3 targets, 8 yards, 2.8 fantasy points, nothing. And Chase Claypool was active with 2 targets. So they're, maybe Claypool's worth a dart throwing dynasty. Outside of that, I don't really care. They're going to convert him to a big slot / tight end. That's just what his path to whatever is in the NFL. So just keep an eye on him moving forward. Now with the tight ends, Drew Smythe, 3 receptions, 28 yards, 5.8 fantasy points. Didn't do much of nothing. They have Julian Hill here. He's a rookie, but it's just I'm not really need to worry about. Hunter Henry, hey, he got 5 fantasy points, so It's the first time in 4 weeks he's got over 5 fantasy points. So congrats to Hunter Henry. 3 receptions, 28 yards. They also have Farrell Brown here on the Patriots. Same thing. 2 receptions, 5.3 fantasy points. Remember how people were hyping on Mike Gesicki in the offseason? Mike Gesicki just is not a good tight end. We saw him do the gritty last week, but he caught a touchdown. My gosh, that was ugly. And that's just where Mike Gesicki's at in his career. Just never been able to put it together. Super athletic, free tight end, but for some reason it doesn't translate on the field. 2 receptions, 11 yards, 3.1 fantasy points. Just nothing. Chad Ryland, another rookie kicker. He had 5 fantasy points, a couple extra points, hit you a field goal. We get to Jason Sanders. He's been one of the better kickers in fantasy. Well, should be one of the better kickers in fantasy. He has 23 fantasy. He's number 23 kicker. Just hasn't worked out for him because the offense really doesn't kick to do field goals, right? So 4 extra points, 1 field goal, 7 fantasy points. It's just, yeah. For an offense as good, you think they would support him, but sometimes the offense is like they score too many points, right? And they don't get field goals. This is why he just kind of falls down. The defenses weren't great. The Miami Dolphins gave you 6 fantasy points, a couple sacks and interception. The Patriots gave you 5 fantasy points, that interception, and a couple sacks. It's very similar. They just mirror each other. Now we're going to move on to the New York Jets against the New York Giants. The Jets pulled this game out in overtime. And let me tell you what, folks, this was a very strange game. Both starting quarterbacks just dealing with injuries. Obviously, the Giants are already on their backup. Tyrod Taylor got injured in this game. I'm going to call him Danny DeVito because it's just a fun name, but it's Tommy DeVito. He's a rookie. I know a lot of names. I don't know a damn thing about Tommy DeVito. I don't know anything about him. So I can't speak to him as being a college player. Really, the first time I heard about him was today when he came into the game. DeVito gave you more fantasy points, but just because he had a touchdown on the ground. 2 completions, and you're going to look at these wide receivers and just wonder how it's physically possible. Teams, wide receivers can put up such bad stats, but this is what it was. You'll see because of how this game worked out. So both offenses were inept. Zach Wilson, 17 for 36, 240 yards, a touchdown. These stats look a heck of a lot better than anything the Giants did for the passing game. Tyrod Taylor, he got injured. He had to go to the hospital overnight shoulder with his ribs. He might have punctured something. We don't know, but he's not playing next week. We're just gonna say that. It was looking promising with Tyrod Taylor and how this offense is moving. Now you're hoping Daniel Jones comes back. You really don't want to depend on Tommy DeVito because he didn't do a damn thing in those runs. Running backs, Saquon Barkley had freaking 41 opportunities in this game. 128 yards on the ground. He gave you just an absurd. He gave you 15 fantasy points. With 41 opportunities, you're expecting for more, but you're okay with 15. It was a rough game. They just absolutely just fed Saquon the rock. Matt Breida even got involved. No surprise because the running backs almost had 50 total touches in this game. So, you're going to involve the backup a little bit. Matt Breida had 5 carries, 13 yards, 1 reception, 2.7 fantasy points. On the flip side, Breece Hall looked electric. Once again, he looks like one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the league. He did a house call reception that was just glorious. He made it look super easy. It was about 50 yards, just made a couple of guys miss, and he just burnt people down the sideline. It's so impressive. He had 12 carries, 17 yards on the ground, did nothing. How he made his day was receptions. 6 receptions, 9 targets, 76 yards, and touchdown receiving. So if you could do that for receiving, you're going to be fantastic. Dalvin Cook did next to nothing, 0.5 fantasy points. We've already talked about this. Cook's droppable. Michael Carter, same thing. He's droppable as well. 2 carries, 2 yards. Neither one of them is just doing anything. It's the Breece Hall show. It's the Saquon Barkley show. They're both locked in top 12 running backs rest of season. You can see how important they are to these teams. Now, the Giants wide receivers, atrocious. We'll go through these fantasy points. There's only 2 guys on the Giants wide receivers that scored fantasy points. Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton. Wan'Dale Robinson, 1.7 fantasy points because he had 2 carries for 17 yards. Didn't have a reception. Darius Slayton, 1 reception, -1 yard. It's just absurd. If you look at the total yards passing for the Giants, they had 11 yards. No, sorry, excuse me. They had 7 yards passing. I don't know how this is possible. This is actually what they did. This is a real life situation. It's just bonkers. You could tell Daboll had no faith in the passing game. Just leaned on Barkley absurd. So we'll go to the Jets wide receivers. Garrett Wilson. 7 receptions, 100 yards. Thank you, Garrett Wilson. He's not dead with Zach Wilson. He's just, you'll take that from Garrett Wilson. We were talking about him being a bench just because the floor is just lower. The ceiling is lower as well, but he's just such a talented player. If he had a capable quarterback, Garrett Wilson would be one of the best fantasy wide receivers in the league. And even still, he was wide receiver 33 going into this game. He's going to rise up a little bit. Like, they're figuring it out with him. Obviously, he would be a top 10 wide receiver. It's just, we're dealing with freaking Zach Wilson. That's kind of the issue. Allen Lazard, 3 receptions, 45 yards, 7.5 fantasy points. We have Xavier Gibson, who is a rookie, he's just a small undersized rookie from Stephen F. Austin. Yeah, 1 carry, 3 yards, 43 fantasy points. The tight ends did nothing. Darren Waller, another injury, folks. So Darren Waller, 1 reception, 4 yards. Ruled out almost immediately in the hamstring. It seemed like it's pretty bad. This is what he's dealt with throughout the year. He finally started coming back, and injuries bit us in the butt. So if you have Darren Waller, you're going to need to go pay up for Dalton Kincaid, or go pay up for Trey McBride, whoever is the hot waiver wire tight end, because you need to replace him. He was starting to look like that guy again, and he's likely going to be gone for a while. So you're going to need to hit up the waiver wire or go trade for a tight end 1 or 2. CJ Uzama, 1 reception, 19 yards, just nothing there. Zerline put up 7 fantasy points because he hit a couple field goals and an extra point. Graham Gano missed 2 field goals, and it cost the Giants this game. They would have won this game and would not have gotten overtime if Graham Gano hit the field goals. He missed 2 of them, only gave 2 fantasy points. The Giants' defense was really good in this game. 4 sacks, forced fumble, 2 fumble recoveries, 13 fantasy points. You'll take it. And the Jets, they gave you 9 fantasy points because they only gave 10 points, 4 sacks, and 4 fumble. Pretty simple. All right. So now we're going to move on to the Jacksonville-Pittsburgh game. Just an ugly game from these offenses. Jacksonville is 6-2, but if you watch them play, they do not look like they're 6-2. They have struggled to really get it all going together. And on the flip side, Pittsburgh's defense has tried to hold them in, but they can only do so much. Like, the offense just is not good, and this is very much a Kenny Pickett, Mitchell Trubisky problem. The injury, Kenny Pickett hurt his ribs. I'm not sure exactly when in the game. It was during the first half, but yeah, keep an eye on that moving forward. Mitchell Trubisky stepped in. He had 15 attempts, 27 yards, 138 yards, and a touchdown. Respectable mop-up duty. Gave you 8 fantasy points. Not great because he had 2 picks, but, you could live with that. Trevor Lawrence has not yet put it together. 24 attempts, 32 completions, 292 yards. Sounds great, right? Just 1 touchdown and basically did nothing on the ground. So that's why he hasn't had these boom games yet. He's just been here consistently because he's just not getting enough touchdowns. Like, that's the problem. So when you're a passing quarterback, and Lawrence, I watched a bit of this game. They look good. It's just not all there yet for him. He's just missing a little bit. They should have tinkered a few things. On the flip side, running back Travis Etienne's a freaking stud, man. He had 27 carries, 79 yards. He had 3 receptions for 7 yards of touchdown. So if you put that all together, that's a monster day for Etienne. He had 25 fantasy points for you. He carried the day. Dearness Johnson, 2 carries, 8 yards. Tanks Bigsby, Tanks Bigsby. I know people are talking about it in the offseason of him taking Etienne's job. That ain't happening. 3 carries, lost a fumble, negative 1.1 fantasy points. We get to the other side. This is what we talked about, why I really didn't want to start Najee or Jaylen Warren. They're going to give you this line every freaking week. Najee, 10 points. Jaylen Warren, 7. This sucks. It doesn't do anything for you, right? So, it gets you by, but where you drafted Najee is super disappointing. And it's good for Warren, but, there's no ceiling, right? Because they cap each other significantly playing in this split work on just a bad offense. It sucks. So, Najee, 7 carries, 13 yards. Oh, just brutal. 5 receptions for 42 did it for him. Jaylen Warren, 5 carries, 19 yards. Another just inefficient day. 4 receptions for 19 yards, so that's how he made his money. We get to the wide receivers. Deontay Johnson freaking came back with a vengeance in this game. He had 12 freaking targets in the first half in this game. Gave you 16 fantasy points, so that was nice to see from Deontay Johnson, but he left the game with an injury. So, yeah, you hate to see it. I think he did end up coming back, but he just dealt with the injury, and it sucks. But yeah, 8 receptions, 85 yards. You take that every day from Deontay Johnson. That's more than enough. You're happy with that. George Pickens, 1 reception on only 5 targets. It's weird how this game went down, but the thing is, Mitchell Trubisky loves Deontay Johnson. So as soon as Mitchell Trubisky comes in, Deontay Johnson's his guy. This is what happened last year. Same situation. So if Pickett is out, I'm going to lower my stance on Pickens. It just is what it is. Pickens had a nice play where it was his 1 reception. He caught it, left over 2 guys, got it in the end zone. So that's how he made his money. He gave him 9 fantasy points. It saved his day. Calvin Austin gave you 4 fantasy points. He had a couple receptions for 19 yards. As we go to the Jaguars wide receivers, it was a Calvin Ridley day, folks. How about that? Calvin Ridley, back alive doing something. Gave you double-digit fantasy points. I'm not even mad about that because it's been 3 weeks since he's hit double-digit fantasy points. 14 fantasy points, 6 receptions, 83 yards. Just that works for Ridley. 14 you take it. Christian Kirk, we were expecting this to be a great day for Kirk. It was not a great day for Kirk. He was pretty high in a lot of people's rankings. Only gave you 4 receptions for 46 yards. Unfortunately, just what it is sometimes. Doesn't work out. On the flip side, man, Evan Ingram balled out. 10 receptions, 88 yards, 16 fantasy points. It would have been more, but he lost a fumble. Luke Farrell had a reception for 5 yards. That doesn't really matter. So Connor Hayward saw 6 targets, which kind of surprising. I don't know why Connor Hayward is seeing 6 targets in this offense. But, Freiermuth's out. Darnell Washington is a blocker. He ain't going to see any targets. So, 7 fantasy points for Connor Hayward. I don't want either of these Pittsburgh tight ends until Pat Freiermuth comes back. It's just no thank you. For the kickers, Brandon McManus had 4 field goals, 16 fantasy points. Heck of a day for McManus. He has been the top 5 kicker, and he's continuing on that tradition. Chris Boswell, 3 fantasy points. He missed a field goal. He was top 16 before this week. I think he's going to go down. We go to the defenses. Jacksonville Jaguars defense had 12 points. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense actually had 12 points. Jaguars caused 2 interceptions, had 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense, 1 interception, 3 sacks, 2 fumbles forced, and 2 fumbles recovered. That's kind of is what it is, right? So we're going to move on to the more surprise of the week, and this is the Tennessee Titans beating the Atlanta Falcons, starting rookie Will Levis, who people were not super high on. And Will Levis showed out. 19 completions, 29 attempts, 238 yards, and count them, folks. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 touchdowns. It was fantastic. I know we were terrified about DeAndre Hopkins with Will Levis, and I still started DeAndre Hopkins in a couple places, but I benched him in others. But, man, this was better than anyone could have ever expected with Will Levis. Nobody's thought of this because everybody was talking about Atlanta being a streamer defense. I pivoted off them at the last minute, and I went with Seahawks defense or Browns defense. I'm not sure. It didn't work as well, but, I just was just worried about Atlanta's defense because I don't trust it as much, even though they've been really good for fantasy. Malik Willis gave you 2 carries, -1 yards, but let's be real. This is the Will Levis show moving forward. Wouldn't surprise me to see once Ryan Tannehill is healthy, like he gets shipped off and sent somewhere, or they just go with Will Levis because this is the best Tennessee offense has looked all year with Will Levis under center. So you're going to keep doing that because he had 30 fantasy points, folks. That's a monster day. We go to the Atlanta side, and you'll notice Desmond Ridder is the second name listed because they said it was an injury precaution, but he was benched. It's pulled as a precaution, but he just sucked, man. And Ritter's been a problem for this offense. Last week I posted Kyle Pitts tape where I broke it down over every one of his routes and the offense in general. I could just tell you from watching that tape, Desmond Ridder is just not a good quarterback, and he limits this offense. I know we've seen a couple EPA games where his EPA has been really high and people thought he was coming along, but now they pulled him, man. He limits these skill position players because they have 3 elite talents, and it sucks. He got pulled. He gave you 3 fantasy points. He had a fumble, just 8 attempts, 12 completions, 71 yards, and there's nothing. Taylor Heineke came in and was better. No surprise. We've talked about this ever since Heineke was there. Said if he gets the starting opportunity, he's going to be better than Ridder. And what did he do? 12 attempts, 21 completions. I can't even talk today. Sorry. 12 completions of 21 attempts, had 175 yards and a touchdown. It's 13 fantasy points. That's not great, but that's a spot start. You'll take that from the backup any day. So I don't know how this quarterback situation is going to shake out, but if it's Heineke moving forward, I'll have more confidence in this offense than I will with Desmond Ridder. We go to the running backs. Bijan got pulled early on they were down the goal line, and they just took him out, and they brought in freaking somebody else. And it was just frustrating, but this is the life of Bijan. He made his day with a touchdown, gave you 12 fantasy points, 11 carries, 62 yards. Got there with a touchdown. Tyler Algier, 8 carries, 31 yards. And even Cordero Patterson, 2 carries for 7 yards. As you can tell, Algier had 3 fantasy points. Cordero Patterson gave you 0.7. Derrick Henry had a Derrick Henry game like we are so used to. It's finally coming back for Henry, so that was nice to see because Tennessee had a lead. They were carrying it, and this is the thing. If Tennessee has a lead, they're going to lean on Henry. If they don't, these are where the floor falls out with Henry. 22 carries, 101 yards, even 4 receptions for 21 yards. 16 fantasy points. You're taking that from Henry because it has been a rough go for Henry, right? He's starting to come along, but it's just been really up and down. Not the boom Derrick Henry that we're so used to, but this offense looked capable, so I'll have more faith in Henry moving forward. Tajay Spears, everyone's sleeper running back, really didn't do much of anything because they were just with Derrick Henry, and it's kind of how the game shook out. But Spears still gave you 6 fantasy points. Not great, but I don't think anybody's really starting him. 3 carries, 27 yards, efficient day. 3 receptions for 9 yards. So that's how you got 6. We go to the wide receivers, and my God, DeAndre Hopkins. 4 receptions, 128 yards, 3 touchdowns. This reminds me of that Randy Moss meme where it's the 3 receptions, 150 yards, 3 touchdowns. This is basically what DeAndre Hopkins did. 34 fantasy points, which I can't remember the last time DeAndre Hopkins gave you 34 fantasy points, but it has been a minute. He was exceptional in this game. Now, I wish his targets were a little bit higher because they did throw it 29 times, but you know what? That's just picking. You're just happy with what you saw from DeAndre Hopkins, just balling out in the end zone. So he hit really well for the people that started him. Congrats to you. Nick Westbrook-Ikine, 1 reception, 33 yards and a touchdown. Literally just got there because of the touchdown. And Kyle Phillips, the slot guy, 3 receptions, 24 yards. Interestingly enough, this was Treylon Burks back playing with them, and he did nothing. 2 targets, 0 receptions. As much as I like Treylon Burks coming out, I really just don't have much interest in him moving forward. They do have Will Levis, so he might be able to support multiple options, but man, it's a rough go for Treylon Burks, the guy that everybody was so high on last year, and it just has not worked out because of a lot of injuries, but he just hasn't looked that good either. So, yeah, it's kind of just where we're at with Treylon Burks. Drake London, once again, led the team in fantasy points. 5 receptions on 7 attempts, 55 yards. Not a great day, but he didn't kill you. 10.5 fantasy points. But we go down. The next wide receiver, Kadarrell Hodge. He had 3 receptions for 75 yards. We have Scotty Miller, who plays a bit of a deep threat too. 2 receptions with a touchdown, 14 yards. Gave you 9.4 fantasy points. Van Jefferson, 3 receptions, 24 yards, 5.4 fantasy points. And Matt Collins got involved with 4 fantasy points because he had a couple of receptions. We get down to tight ends. Kyle Pitts, 6 fantasy points because he had 3 receptions, 35 yards. Jonnu Smith basically disappeared in this game. He had 1 completion because they did a trick play, or 1 attempt. They did not complete it. 1 reception for 13 yards. So this is kind of the issue with Kyle Pitts and the whole freaking just disaster that is Desmond Ridder. The way they're using him is he's not playing all the snaps, and it's just super frustrating. So he's not seeing all the snaps. He's not a first read in this offense. It's just really just a problem. I hate to say it's like anything more than that, but it's that's right. I'm checking up Kyle Pitts' snap count right now. Yeah. So he ran 27 routes, which decent amount, 27-43. That's not a great percentage, right? You want it to be a lot higher, but he was still splitting routes around with Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith actually ran more routes than him. So if this is a thing for Kyle Pitts, like the ceiling is just not going to happen unless he's incredibly efficient. It just lowers the floor and the ceiling. Kyle Pitts is like probably borderline top 12 tight end for me the rest of the season just because it's by default, but man, you don't feel good about him. On the flip side, another hyped tight end that we liked, Chig Okonkwo, 4 receptions, 23 yards, gave you 6.7 fantasy points, kind of what Kyle Pitts was doing, not much there. We got a few games we got to get through here. Young Hoku, 12 fantasy points, 3 field goals he made. Nick Folk, 4 fantasy points because he had 4 extra points. Falcons defense, they gave you 3 points. The Titans defense, they gave you 9 points because they had 6 sacks, folks. That is a lot. All right, we're going to speed up because I am going way too slow here. All right, Philadelphia beat Washington. It was a rough game for Philly. Jalen Hurts really showed out towards the end, but it was a rough start. He had a turnover on the tush push, which is kind of surprising. You expected him to walk in the end zone, and he turned it over against Washington. But Philly wins 38-31 over Washington. They moved to 7-1. Washington's 3-5. Jalen Hurts, 31 fantasy points, 319 yards, 4 touchdowns. Just did his thing. Like, he looked great. And that connection with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith was looking like peak last year. So maybe Hurts has passed the injury or whatever it is that they were really talked about. But, man, look. Sam Howell, 34 fantasy points. The man was on it today. I'll give my props to Sam Howell. I don't think he's a great quarterback, but he didn't take the sacks. I think fittingly enough, he lost the last play of the game on a sack, but he really didn't take the sacks in this game. And so, like, props to him. If he doesn't take the sacks, like, they had 52 attempts, but that's 397 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's well done for Sam Howell. Running backs, DeAndre Swift, just another solid day from Swift, 14 fantasy points. He had 16 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown. Didn't really do much on the ground. Had 2 receptions for 7 yards. Kenneth Gainwell gave you 5 fantasy points, 2 carries, had 5 receptions for 30 yards. He did fumble it, though. So it could have been a better day for Gainwell. But it was in the end zone where he fumbled it, too. This is just not inside the red zone. 5 fantasy points. Boston Scott had a carry, reception for 4 yards. On the flip side, Brian Robinson, because they were losing, didn't really get all the work. And this is the issue. We talked about Chris Rodriguez. He didn't play. So I know we were kind of moving up on Chris Rodriguez, but yeah, it looked like Brian Robinson was like, no, that's not happening. 10 carries, 59 yards on the ground, 2 receptions for Robinson. And Gibson, they identically both put up 9 fantasy points. Gibson had 2 carries, 14 yards, 5 receptions. So that's how he made his day. We get to the wide receivers. Jahan Dotson balled out, my friends. 8 receptions, 108 yards, and a touchdown. That's 24 fantasy points. That is how you do it. And Jameson Crowder came back from wherever Jameson Crowder has been. 7 receptions, 95 yards, and a touchdown. This is like peak Jameson Crowder back in the day for the Bills. 22 fantasy points. Terry McLaurin had 17 fantasy points. When you pass it 52 times, there's a lot of points to go around, right? 5 receptions, 63 yards, and a touchdown. Even Curtis Samuel, 4 receptions for 22 yards. Only gave you 6 fantasy points. Fortunately, as we go to the Philadelphia wide receivers, A.J. Brown, this is like his 6th straight game or something over 125 yards in a row. This is just absurd stuff he's doing. Yeah, this is 6th straight game over 125 yards. Just insane stuff from A.J. Brown. 8 receptions, 103 yards, 2 touchdowns. The man is he's a man among boys. Like, A.J. Brown is just so good. If you have him on your team, you're loving life because he is hitting that ceiling, which we talked about he might not be able to do. He's doing it. Devonta Smith, he finally had the game. 7 receptions, 99 yards, a touchdown, 22 fantasy points. Well done. And Julio Jones, I was wondering who that big dude that caught that touchdown was in the game. It was Julio Jones. He had 1 reception, 8 yards, and a touchdown. So congrats on Julio. Gives him touchdown regression with the Eagles. Olamide Zacchaeus caught 1 reception for 5 yards, 1.5 fantasy points. Dallas Goedert still okay day, not great. But, it doesn't kill you. 4 receptions, 36 yards, 7.6 fantasy points. No other tight end did anything for the Eagles. For Washington, Logan Thomas showed out. 8 targets, 6 receptions, 44 yards, and a touchdown. 16 fantasy points. John Bates did 1 reception for 17 yards, 2 fantasy points. We get to the kickers. Jake Elliott had 5 extra points, 10 total fantasy points. Joey Sly had 1 field goal over 50 and 4 extra points, so he gave you 9. Eagles defense gave you 3. This was just an offensive game, so neither one of these defenses did much of anything. Washington Commanders gave you 3 defense, so both of them let you down. Now we're moving on to the late window. The Seahawks beat the Cleveland Browns, both teams 4-2, 24-20. Geno Smith for the Seattle, 23 completions of 37 attempts, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, gave you 15 fantasy points. Wasn't great, but didn't kill you. PJ Walker put up 11 fantasy points because he had a couple turnovers in this game. Could have been better. Had 15 for 31, 244 yards, a touchdown, 3 turnovers. That's how you get you 11 fantasy points. Should have been a lot better day for him. But, he's PJ Walker. This is kind of what happens. Interestingly enough, for the Cleveland backfield, Kareem Hunt was the guy that got the high-value touches, and by doing so, got the most fantasy points. So 14 carries, 55 yards, and a touchdown, 1 reception for 12 yards, 13 fantasy points. You're good with that. Pierre Strong, 10 carries, 41 yards, and a reception. If you played Pierre Strong, you don't really hate this at all. Interestingly enough, Jerome Ford played and had 9 carries in this game. I'm surprised they even played him, honestly, if it is a high ankle sprain, but, props to Ford for playing through. That's just mentally tough. Gave you 4 fantasy points. I don't think anybody started him. I think maybe it said 7% of people started him. Either they don't care about their team or they just kind of had to. I think that's why they played him. Zach Charbonnet actually outsnapped Kenneth Walker. So I don't know what changed in this game or what happened, but Walker was also efficient, but Charbonnet just saw more snaps. So I don't know what Seattle's doing, but Charbonnet's back from the dead. As good as Kenneth Walker has been, this is an eye-opening performance. They basically split the work down the middle. Charbonnet had 8 fantasy points. Walker had 8 fantasy points. Charbonnet had 5 carries for 33 yards, 2 receptions, 11 yards through the air. Walker had 8 carries for 66 yards and had 1 reception for 4 yards. Yeah, I don't know. It was a weird game for Seattle. They kind of went away from, the run, and they more focused on the pass, and this is why the pass catchers looked really good. Tyler Lockett had 22 fantasy points. It was a Tyler Lockett day. 8 receptions, 81 yards, and a touchdown. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 3 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. DK Metcalf had 14 freaking targets and only gave you 11 fantasy points. This is Garrett Wilson peak stuff right here. 5 receptions, 67 yards. And Jake Bobo, who has stolen DK Metcalf's red zone powers, got in the end zone. 1 carry, had a touchdown, 2 receptions for 23 yards. For the Browns, Amari Cooper had 6 receptions for 89 yards, 14 fantasy points. You can live with that. I know we were worried about Cooper with PJ Walker, so 14 fantasy points in there, solid. I literally want nothing to do with Elijah Moore. He's just not doing anything. 2 receptions, 30 yards, 5 fantasy points. Marquise Goodwin, that's not really a guy you're trusting. Donovan Peoples-Jones did nothing. David Njoku came back to life, and I don't know if it had to do with Halloween and the mask or whatever. 4 receptions, 77 yards, and touchdown for 17 fantasy points. And Jordan Akins is back playing on team, which I didn't even know he was. Had one completion for 6 yards and 1 fantasy point. Noah Fant, he's still just a dicey dart throw, but no one anybody's playing. Like 2 receptions, 32 yards, 5 fantasy points. The kickers, Dustin Hopkins gave you 8 fantasy points. Jason Myers, who's been solid this year, he gave you 6, so not a great day for them. The Seahawks defense really brought it. They had 11 fantasy points. They had 2 picks, 3 sacks, forced fumble for 11 fantasy points. The Browns had 2 interceptions for 6 fantasy points. We're going to move on to one of our late games, and this is the Arizona-Baltimore game. Baltimore won 31-24. Lamar Jackson had 12 fantasy points, which, considering how good they were, they just really focused on the ground in the second half. He was 18 for 27, 157 yards, 5 carries. It just didn't really do much of anything. It's just unfortunate for Lamar. Baltimore is just too good in this matchup, so Lamar didn't really have to do much of anything. Like, he just, a couple things, but man, it should have been a big game for him. It turned out it was Gus Edwards that had the monster game. But on the flip side, Josh Dobbs he gave you a lot of fantasy points. A guy that's been kind of figured out gave you his third best game, and the second since week 4. This was his best performance. 25 of 37, 208 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, had 2 picks, but he gave you 6 carries, another touchdown on the ground for 26 yards. That's how you get 24 fantasy points, man. If you get those rushing touchdowns, that boosts you up. Interestingly enough, Amari DiMercado was the guy that saw 77% of the total touches, 20 carries, 78 yards, 8.9 fantasy points. Keontae Ingram didn't do anything. Damian Williams didn't do anything. They had to combine 4 fantasy points. Just this is Amari DiMercado's backfield until James Conner comes back, whenever that is. But yeah, you can ride DiMercado these next few weeks. He looks good, and they trust him on that offense. So if he's still around when Kyler comes back, DiMercado will be looking nice. It's all about Conner. I'll assume he will be taking some work from Conner when Conner comes back, because DiMercado has looked really good. On the flip side, Baltimore, Gus Edwards, if you started him, you're loving life. He gave you 29 fantasy points. He had 19 carries, 80 yards on the ground, an efficient day. Shocker, Gus is always efficient. 3 touchdowns, folks. That's how he did it. Justice Hill, 9 fantasy points. He got there with the receptions, but 4 carries, 15 yards, just not that much of anything. And what I mean by, like, the Ravens really just milked the clock in the second half, look at these wide receivers. Rashad Bateman led the team with 7 fantasy points, 2 receptions for 34 yards. Zay Flowers, 5 receptions for 19 yards. He gave him 6 fantasy points. No other wide receiver gave you any fantasy points for Baltimore. Yeah, we thought it was a blow-up game for Zay Flowers. We missed on that one. On the flip side, Hollywood Brown got there with a touchdown. 6 receptions, only threw to 3 yards, but he got the touchdown. That's how he got 15 fantasy points. Michael Wilson, second best wide receiver in this game, 9 fantasy points, 4 receptions, 58 yards. Rondale Moore, he's just kind of just pigeonholed into what he is. 4 fantasy points because he had 2 carries for 11 yards and 2 receptions for 10 yards. Trey McBride was the tight end 1 on the week. Smashed, way outperformed Mark Andrews. 25 fantasy points. He had 10 receptions on 14 targets, 95 yards and a touchdown. If Trey McBride is available on waivers, go get him and go get him now. He looked incredible in this game, and he was a focal point for Josh Dobbs. So if Kyler comes back and him and McBride connect, like, that's going to be a nice connection for a long time with those 2. Mark Andrews still gave you 14 fantasy points because he got the touchdown, 4 receptions, 40 yards. Isaiah Likely, 1 reception, something. Justin Tucker gave you 7 fantasy points. Matt Prater gave you 5. This is kind of just a ho-hum performance for both of them. And because there were so many points scored, Baltimore's defense only gave you 7. Arizona's defense only gave you 4, so not much there. This is the shocker of the day. Kansas City lost to Denver 24-9. They got smoked by Denver. I don't know what was going on with the Kansas City offense, but it looked bad today, folks. Denver just looked better. Like, it's like the team switched jerseys. But yeah, Russell Wilson gave you 20 fantasy points, 12 for 19, 114 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He got there with 8 carries too. That's pretty good for Russell Wilson. So if you get 20 points for Wilson, everybody. Mahomes, 5 fantasy points. He killed teams today. So if you're on a guillotine league and you have Mahomes, yikes, I'm sorry about that. 24 attempts, 38, 241 yards, 2 completions, and he lost a fumble. 3 turnovers from Mahomes is very anti-Mahomes. That's how you get 5 fantasy points, and the touchdowns were out there. Pacheco, we thought it was a smash matchup for Pacheco. 6 fantasy points, 8 carries, 40 yards, 3 receptions for negative yardage. McKinnon didn't do anything. Clyde Edwards-Helaire didn't do anything. Javonte Williams, bell cow, is back, baby. 18 fantasy points, 27 carries, 85 yards, 3 receptions, and had a receiving touchdown. This is how he got 18 fantasy points. Nice to have you back, Javonte. I've been liking myself some Jaleel McLaughlin just as like a dynasty stash, but yeah, Javonte looks good today. He looks like he's back. It wasn't the most efficient day, but like you watch him play and you're like, yeah, that's the Javonte I remember. Jaleel McLaughlin, he's basically replaced Samaje Perine on this roster. So congrats to him being the RB2 on the team. 4 carries, 33 yards, gave you 5 fantasy points. Samaje Perine, 4 opportunities, 4 fantasy points. Just didn't do anything. Jerry Jeudy led the team in receiving because why? He had the touchdown, folks. 2 receptions, 50 yards, a touchdown. Cortland Sutton also had a touchdown. He had 2 receptions, 29 yards, a touchdown. Marvin Mims, 1 reception, 1 yard. Like I said, he's been droppable. Like Marvin Mims is not worth your time in redraft. It's not coming together for him. For the Chiefs, Rashee Rice led the team once again. 4 receptions, 56 yards, 9 fantasy points. Not the best day, not a great day. You're a little disappointed. Should have been better for him, but it is what it is. It doesn't necessarily kill you. Justin Watson gave you 2 receptions, 6 fantasy points. MVS, another 2 receptions, 27 yards, lost a fumble. Sky Moore, he's basically just dead in Dynasty, not really interested. 1 reception for 1.8 fantasy points. Cole Hardman, he showed up again in 1.6 fantasy points. Kadarius Toney, same thing with Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore. You can just throw them both out. It's not working out for them. It's really the Rashee Rice and no one else on this. The Denver tight ends didn't record a stat, so we don't even need to talk about them. It's an interesting day how this worked out for Denver. Their defense was really good in this game. The offense didn't really have to do much. Travis Kelce had 6 receptions, 58 yards, 11 fantasy points. Noah Gray had a couple of receptions for 4 fantasy points, but yeah, you're hoping for more from Kelce. It just sometimes doesn't happen. And until Dulcich comes back, I'm just not really interested in any Denver tight end. The kickers, Harrison Butker gave you 11 points, so if you started him, you're okay with that. Well, let's 5 fantasy points. Not great. He missed a field goal. Could have been a little bit better. Both defenses, were respectable. The Broncos defense had 18 fantasy points because they forced a couple fumbles, a couple sacks, a couple picks, and only get 9 points. That's how you do it. That's how you become top 5 defense. Kansas City defense, 12 fantasy points, respectable. So, even though they lost, they didn't kill you. So, props to them. And then we had another game which really just Cincinnati dominated San Francisco. San Francisco has lost back-to-back games. So, yeah, I don't know what's going on with Purdy, but he seems to be struggling. And he put up stats in this game, but Purdy did not look good. Joe Burrow, 30 fantasy points, 28-32, 283 yards, 3 touchdowns. Burrow just looked great, even against the San Francisco defense. So Joe Burrow's back, folks. Don't worry about Burrow. On the flip side, Brock Purdy put up 19 points, but it wasn't his best. 22 for 31, 365 yards, touchdown, threw a couple picks, and he lost a fumble. 3 turnovers in a game will do it for you, folks. This is what happened to Brock Purdy. He did have 6 carries for 54 yards, so if he's scrambling like that, that's what you love to see because that is 5.7 fantasy points right there, just scrambling. McCaffrey he's eternal, man. 29 fantasy points, 12 carries, 54 yards, a touchdown, 6 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. This is how McCaffrey does it. 2 touchdowns, just doing his thing. Elijah Mitchell, 3 carries, just nothing. He did have a goal line attempt. It did not work out. Next play, McCaffrey scores. That's how it goes sometimes. Joe Mixon got in the end zone, folks. 20 fantasy points for Mixon. I think this might be the first time this year he's cleared 20, and it is. 16 carries, 87 yards, had a touchdown, and 3 receptions. So congrats for Mixon. As we move on to the wide receivers, Jamar Chase, dog. Him and Ayuk were clearly the best 2 wide receivers on the field today, and they did not disappoint. So Jamar Chase, 10 receptions, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Just looked the part for 25 fantasy points. Just loving life. Tyler Boyd's been interesting. He had 3 receptions, 4 yards, and a touchdown, 13 fantasy points. But back-to-back weeks, double-digit fantasy points. And today was lower on the targets, but the last 5 weeks, it's been 7 targets minimum each of those games. So, he's been involved in this offense. It hasn't clicked, but, you can do worse than streaming Tyler Boyd. It's just there is no ceiling with Tyler Boyd when you play him. T. Higgins, somewhat of a bounce-back performance. I mean, it's only 11 fantasy points. I guess I'm happy we're excited about that, but this has just been another he's wide receiver 69 on the year, folks. It's just not working out for T. Higgins. 5 receptions for 69 yards. Just is what it is, right? I would go to the San Francisco 49ers. Brandon Ayuk, 5 receptions for 109 yards, 15 fantasy points. That'll do. That'll do it every week. You're happy with that. Ray McLeod had 6 fantasy points on 2 receptions. No other Niners wide receiver did anything. George Kittle had 23 fantasy points. 9 receptions, 149 yards. Kittle looked great. This was vintage Kittle performance. He looks so freaking good. I think he's the tight end 2 on the week, and my goodness, George Kittle looks so damn good. Irv Smith is alive, I guess. 4 receptions, 25 yards, and a fumble. We go to kickers, and then McPherson had 8 fantasy points. Jake Moody had 5. It's kind of just whatever day for both of those guys. On defense, the 49ers defense gave you 6 because they allowed 31 points. Had a couple sacks and a forced fumble. The Bengals defense gave you 10, so they, respectable, not great, but you're playing the San Francisco 49ers offense, like you'll take 10 fantasy points from them. So, yeah, that is us covering these games, folks. Let me refresh this really quick because I'm not getting the scores from our last game. I don't know why Sleeper is not loading them, but it's malfunctioning. So I'm gonna try to do this. Let me see if I can go back to week 8. Where is the game? There it is. All right. So the last game, Sunday night game, the Chargers stomped out the Bears, 30-13. It was a great performance. It was a vintage Justin Herbert performance. Tyson Bagent, he gave you 11 fantasy points, but man, it was rough. He had a couple picks, just did not look very good. No surprise. So Bagent, 25-37, 232 yards, 2 interceptions. It'd be a lot better if he doesn't have the interceptions, just no touchdowns. That's how you 11 fantasy points. Herbert looked awesome. So Herbert looks back. We had a couple weeks where it was rough. But 31-40, 298 yards, 3 touchdowns, 27 fantasy points. That's the Justin Herbert we know and love, and we like to see. And look at the running backs. Would you look at that? You target Austin Eckler in the receiving game, and good things happen. 23 fantasy points for Eckler. 15 carries, 29 yards. That's not where he made his money. 7 receptions, 94 yards, and a touchdown. That's how you get 23, and that's what we love to see out of Austin Eckler. Another injury to this wide receiver core, which may have led to this, but Eckler got a lot of these points early and often. So Josh Palmer hurt himself. Not sure what his status is moving forward. It really is it's not looking good. He came back into the game, but he hurt his knee, so I don't know what's going on with Palmer, but we'll see what happens with those two moving forward. But back to the running backs. Kelly had 6 carries for 21 yards. Isaiah Spiller made an appearance, 3 carries for 3 yards, 1.8 fantasy points. Yeah, so this Bears backfield became a 3-way split, which is never what you want to see. Like, you had 3 guys seeing work in this game, and this was the problem, what I was worried about with Deontay Foreman. If they're not winning, he's going to lose a lot of work. So we'll go to the top guy, Darrington Evans, 4 carries, 18 yards. He had a touchdown on the ground. That really helped him. But 3 receptions, 22 yards. Bagent was targeting these running backs, so that's nice to see. So good for Darrington Evans making a name for himself. I know a lot of us like Roschon Johnson, but he just came off of a very severe concussion. So he played. I'm obviously I expect his usage to go up as we move on in the season, but 6 carries, 21 yards, 3 receptions for 10 yards. That's how he got you 6 fantasy points, and Dante Foreman with 9 carries for 34 yards, 2 targets, 4 fantasy points. So if you started Foreman, you're disappointed. The other guys, you kind of just, you couldn't really count on either one. Roschon coming off the injury. But yeah, Foreman did seem like kind of a trap play to me this week, and that's how it worked out. For the Chargers wide receivers, Keenan Allen, 8 receptions, 69 yards, just vintage PPR. Keenan Allen, 14 fantasy points. You like that? Now Quentin Johnston, he had 5 receptions, 50 yards. Quentin Johnston finally showed life. I don't know what happened or however this shook out, but QJ, he ain't dead yet. So if you have QJ rostered, which 35% of people do, you're probably going to hold on to him because you don't know how this goes from here moving forward. But interestingly enough, a guy who a lot of people didn't even know was rostered with the Chargers, I thought he was still on Dallas. Sammy Fehoko had 1 reception for a touchdown, so congrats to him. Josh Palmer dealt with the injury. It was a rough day for him. 3 receptions, 24 yards, 5 fantasy points. Demario Davis had 2 receptions for 4 yards, not much of anything. So we go to Chicago. DJ Moore had a rough game. This is not what you like to see. 4 receptions, 55 yards, 9.5 fantasy points. Darnell Mooney, 1 reception, 41 yards, 5 fantasy points. He's been pretty gross for Mooney this entire season. Besides week 1, it's just not working out for him. And now you're dealing with Tyson Bagent. This is kind of how it's going to go. He's going to lower the floor and ceiling for these wide receivers until he proves he's capable NFL quarterback. Tyler Scott, 1 reception for 11 yards. Velus Jones had a wide open touchdown that he just fell down and dropped in the end zone. That pick is looking rougher and rougher every day. That Chicago took basically a special teams guy in the 3rd round instead of an actual wide receiver. I don't know what Ryan Poles is doing with that pick. That seems like a big miss. Yeah, and we even had Trent Taylor get in. Yeah, 1 carry, -2 yards, nothing around. Cole Kmet, 10 targets, 79 yards. I know, I think it was Aaron who was talking about this morning. It might have been Mike. They said because it's a backup quarterback, like I like Kmet in this matchup. Props to them, but I was terrified with Kmet. But yeah, 17 fantasy points. Well done for Kmet. Like that's just a hell of a day. Robert Tonyan had 1 reception. He's just not really doing anything. Yeah, we were talking about Gerald Everett. He did not play. So Donald Parham had 4 receptions, 43 yards, touchdown. So if you started him, you got 14 fantasy points. So congrats. The kickers, Cameron Dicker had a day. Made 3 field goals, made 3 extra points. That's 16 fantasy points, my friend. That's well done for a kicker. Carlos Santos gave you an extra point. I mean, congrats. The Bears defense gave you 3 fantasy points. The Chargers defense gave you 9. Yeah, Chargers defense did a little bit, but it just wasn't great. This game was pretty much a blowout and in hand throughout. We were watching this game at Red Robin, and I was like, yeesh, this game just looks ugly, and it kind of is. It's, what happens when you go from Justin Fields, who is what he is, the talent is clear as day. It's there. He's maybe not the best quarterback in the world, but man, Tyson Bagent, there's a reason he's a small school guy. Just like basically, he found his way onto the Bears roster. But, this is kind of what happens when you bring guys like this in. They can struggle. It's just a tough road with quarterbacks like this. So moving forward, the Bears offense, as long as Bagent's the starter, like you just got to drop it. That is what it is. But that's going to wrap up our week 8. We'll have our Monday Night Football. We'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. But yeah, me. When I talk, I could run a little long, so I could have run this for 2-3 hours if I really just kept going. But yeah, this is the week 8 fantasy football game recap show. We'll be releasing this tomorrow morning, and we'll drop it there on all the platforms. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for joining me and going over this game recap. I hope you enjoyed it, and if I don't hear from you until Tuesday, happy Halloween, folks. As you can see, Arthur Smith right here. I was in this all day. Do a little bee jumping, but yeah, it is what it is. So take care, folks. I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday night.